Welcome to Dark Nightmare Memory. They tell you it's just a drill. They say it's a routine. Doors locked, lights off, everyone quiet. Simple instructions. But have you ever noticed how, when the announcement hits the speakers, the room changes? Not all at once. Not loudly. But in the silence that follows, you hear it. Someone stops breathing. It doesn't matter how many drills you've been through. This time feels different. A teacher fumbles with the blinds. Someone's phone lights up, then disappears beneath a hoodie. You glance at the door. The thin line of light from the hallway seems longer. Too still. Too empty. Then you start counting. How many of us are in this room? Where are your friends? Who was the last one in? Minutes pass. No voices on the intercom. No footsteps outside. And then you hear it. One knock. Just one. From the other side of the classroom door. No one moves. No one dares speak. But the knock came from inside the locked building. And every single person in your class is accounted for. For schools. For separate lockdowns. All of them real. None of them explained. Tonight, we're telling the stories that were never meant to be heard. Stories from students, teachers, and survivors who swear that the lockdown wasn't the worst part. It was what happened when the lights came back on. We didn't expect to have a sub that day. Ms. Kendall always showed up. Rain, fever, whatever, she was the kind of teacher who came in even if the world was falling apart. So when we walked into room 204 and saw a tall man standing at the board, already writing something in chalk, the room got quiet. He didn't turn around right away. Didn't say his name. Just kept writing. I remember the writing because it wasn't in cursive. It wasn't block letters either. It looked wrong. Almost like he was copying letters from a language he didn't speak. No one asked questions. We just took our seats. It's weird how fast a room can get awkward. Like, everyone's looking at each other, but no one wants to admit something feels off. He finally turned around. No smile. No roll call. Just this long, flat stare across the room like he was memorizing every face. I don't remember him blinking. Ever. Not once. I was watching. He gave us a worksheet. Something about ancient civilizations. But the questions didn't make sense. What survives after the fall? Who speaks when the doors are locked? I raised my hand to ask for clarification. He looked at me for a few seconds, then shook his head. And that's when the intercom clicked on. Attention all students and staff. We are now initiating a full lockdown. This is not a drill. Please follow protocol immediately. He didn't react. He didn't move at all. Everyone else jumped into action. Lights off, blinds down, huddled by the wall. But he just stood there. Like he didn't hear it. Or didn't care. We waited. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. And that's when Emma, who sat closest to the door, whispered something I still remember clearly. Did anyone see him unlock the door? The room was completely still. No one said a word. You could hear the clock ticking behind the projector. I counted 47 ticks before something changed. It started soft. Just footsteps. Not fast. Not frantic. 1, 2, then silence. Then a doorknob rattled. But it wasn't ours. Across the hall, Mr. Grady's room. It happened again. 3 doors down this time. Then closer. We all stared at the classroom door. But no one moved. Then I realized something else. He was still standing. Right there in front of the whiteboard. His eyes weren't on the door. They were on us. And then he said it. My name. Just my first name. Low. Like it wasn't for me. Just out into the room. Aaron. I froze. Everyone looked at me. I didn't answer. He kept going. Juliana. Chris. Deja. Eric. Each name exactly how it said in roll call. One by one. In order. His mouth barely moved. The words came out like he was reciting a script he'd memorized too well. Except something was off. The way he said them, like he wasn't calling attendance. He was confirming it. Emma whispered again. She asked the question no one else wanted to say out loud. How does he know our names? And then came the last name. It wasn't anyone in our class. He said it slowly, like he was tasting it. Harper. No one moved. No one answered. And then someone knocked on the inside of the supply closet. The moment he whispered the last name, the lights went out. No backup lights. No hallway glow. Just dark. Not movie theater dark. This was different. Thick. Pressing. like something had pulled the sky down over the building. No one screamed, but I could hear people breathing hard, trying to stay quiet. Someone was crying. Maybe Ava. I couldn't tell. It didn't matter anymore. He didn't move. The sub stayed where he was, perfectly still. I swear I could still see his outline. Then came the sound. The classroom door. It opened slowly, even though we'd locked it. Even though the handle never turned. But no one came in. I kept thinking, why didn't he react? Why didn't he do anything? He was watching us, but not to protect us. Almost like he was waiting to see which one of us noticed it first. A blur passed across the doorway. Fast. Too fast. Then the door slammed shut again. And just like that, the lights came back on. He was gone. The substitute was gone. We were all still on the ground, against the wall. No one had moved. We would have seen him leave. But he wasn't there. Roll call came 10 minutes later, over the intercom. Admin called each room, one by one. Teachers responded, one by one. When it was our turn, no one knew what to say. We just stayed silent. Then Emma said it. "Where's Callie?" We looked around. There was an empty spot on the floor where Callie had been sitting. Her worksheet was still there. Her bag was still there. But she wasn't. The door had never opened wide enough. No one had left the room. No one had moved. Later that week, our principal told us that the sub had been a last-minute placement. They couldn't tell us his name, because according to the district, there was no substitute assigned to room 204 that day. And the CCTV footage? They showed it during the investigation. We saw it, frame by frame. He never left room 204. Not once. But the footage also showed him entering every other classroom during the lockdown. At the exact same time. They never found him. The substitute was never seen again. No calls. No reports. Nothing on the cameras. Nothing in the system. They brought in the police. Even the district tech team reviewed everything. Entry logs, security footage, teacher registries. Nothing. No records matched his face, his name, his ID badge. It was as if he'd been invented for that day, for that classroom. We were dismissed early that Friday. Lockdown was lifted around 4 p.m. Parents showed up in crowds, frantic, demanding answers. But no one could explain what had happened, or where Callie had gone. Her parents showed up every day after. Just sat in their car outside the school for hours. I think they were hoping someone would bring her back. Like it was all just some mistake. Then there was Matthew. He'd been sitting closest to the sub. Stared at him most of the time. I remember thinking he was brave for not looking away. But after that day, he wouldn't talk. Not to his parents. Not to teachers. Not even in whispers. The counselor said it wasn't just trauma. She said it was like something had taken the words out of him. He looked me in the eye once, maybe a week after everything. We were in the hallway. I just asked him if he was okay. He didn't answer. But he started to shake. And then he held up one finger. One single finger. Like he was counting or warning me. That's when I realized. The sub had called names in a very specific order. Callie was first. Matthew was second. And me. I was third. Story 2. It started like any other Thursday at Millwood High. The halls still smelled faintly of bleach from the janitor's early morning shift. Most kids were half asleep, scrolling through their phones, waiting for the bell. But I remember exactly when Jamie found the note. And I remember the way her face changed when she read it, like someone had just whispered something in her ear that only she could hear. We were by locker 119. She'd been running late after gym. She opened it like usual, but the envelope inside didn't have her name. It just said, "Don't go to 5th period. It's coming." I saw it. Plain white. No return name. Just 7 words written in red ink, or maybe it was marker. I think. She asked me if it was a prank. But nobody had been near her locker before lunch. And no one could have slipped it in during class. Hers was right under a security camera. We showed it to Mr. Delaney, the assistant principal. He told us it was probably just a joke. You could tell he didn't want the hassle. Just told Jamie to throw it away. She didn't. She folded it once, twice, and slipped it into her back pocket. I think deep down she believed it. Not in a paranoid way. More like how you listen to your gut when something doesn't feel right. 5th period was history. Room 2B. Jamie said she didn't feel good. Told the teacher she was going to the nurse. I went with her, just to stall. She was shaking. Her hands were cold. Something felt off in the air, like when a storm's coming but the sky won't tell you when. At exactly 12:42, before she even reached the nurse's office, the intercom clicked on. 3 words, calm and slow. Lockdown. Now. Lockdown. Then nothing. No alarm. No follow-up. Just silence. The hallway lights flickered, and the sound of slamming doors echoed through the corridors like something trying to trap us inside. Teachers moved like clockwork, pulling shades, locking doors. But it wasn't a drill. We knew that. You could feel it. Jamie grabbed my arm. Her voice cracked when she whispered, "It's 5th period now." We hid behind the nurse's desk. The lights were still on, but the window in the door had been covered with a paper sheet last week. Too many students staring out during drills. It was quiet except for the clock on the wall and the squeak of Jamie's sneakers shifting against the floor. Then we heard it. A slam. Followed by another. Then another. Not footsteps. Doors. Opening, closing. But never the same door twice. The nurse hadn't been there all day. We were alone. And from the sound of it, whatever was moving outside. It wasn't running. It was choosing. Each step intentional. Like it knew exactly where it was headed. Then my phone buzzed. Just once. No text. Just a buzz. I turned it over. 5% battery. No signal. Jamie's face was pale. I whispered, "It's probably the police doing a sweep." But I didn't believe that. Neither did she. The hall camera feeds, the ones the staff monitor from the front office, they showed the classrooms. We didn't see this part ourselves, but later, we'd hear about it. Room 2B, Jamie's 5th period class, the one she was supposed to be in, the one the note warned her to avoid. The door opened on its own. Everyone assumed it was a teacher checking in. But no one entered. Not visibly. Yet 5 minutes later, the screaming started. A desk flipped. The lights went out. They said the room smelled like ammonia. Like chemicals. But when they checked the HVAC system, it hadn't even been running. 3 students passed out. One had a panic attack so severe they had to sedate her. But the weirdest part? Jamie's name was called during roll loudly. Like she was present. Like someone answered for her. We weren't there. But the teacher marked her down as here in perfect handwriting. In red ink. Exactly like the letter she got. When the room was cleared, the police came in. They found nothing. No intruder. No weapons. But every desk in that classroom had been moved 3 inches to the left. Perfectly aligned. Except for Jamie's. Hers wasn't there. The building was cleared room by room. Teachers led students out in lines. They made us keep our eyes forward. No phones. No questions. When we got outside, the principal was already giving a statement. Calm face. Measured words. She said it was just a precaution. No evidence of a break-in. No threat inside the school. But we knew that wasn't true. 2 days later, emergency services released their official report. No structural damage. No signs of forced entry. No fingerprints. Nothing on the classroom cameras. But here's the part they didn't say during the press briefing. Every minute of footage from the hallway outside room 2B was gone. Erased. Not corrupted. Not glitched. Erased. And the backup server didn't have it either. The police tech who pulled the files, his name was Calder, told a reporter off record that it was like someone scrubbed time. Like the hallway just didn't exist for those 42 minutes. That same night, Jamie called me. She sounded off. Distant. Like she hadn't slept since the lockdown. She said she found something. Tucked deep in her math book. Between chapter 5 and chapter 6. It was another note. Same red ink. Same jagged handwriting. This one didn't warn her. It said, "You survived this time." She asked if I'd told anyone about the first letter. I said no. She hadn't either. But someone knew. She asked me one last thing before we hung up. I still think about it all the time. Why me? What would have happened if I had gone to class? I didn't answer. Jamie didn't come back the next week. Or the one after. A few days later, her mom called the school to say she wouldn't be returning. No reason given. But everyone knew she'd transferred. Moved out of state. She never picked up my calls after that. Not even a goodbye text. I only heard from her once, One short message that showed up on my phone around 3:17 a.m. for weeks later. Text reads, "They don't forget." Then message deleted. That was it. Then silence. No one at school talks about that lockdown anymore. It's like it was scrubbed from more than just the footage. Teachers avoid questions. The class schedule was quietly shuffled around. Room 2B? It's always dark now. I still walk past that hallway sometimes. I still wonder what really happened behind that door. What marked her name down that day. But most of all, I wonder if it's over. Jamie told me once that she doesn't use her top shelf anymore. Keeps it empty. Because every time she opens a locker, she still checks for another note. If these stories give you chills, you're not alone. But imagine being there. The lights flicker. The hallway goes quiet. Your name is on the list. Would you wait it out or run? Tell us in the comments. What would you do in a real lockdown? And if you haven't already, subscribe. There's more coming. Story 3. It wasn't the storm that made me remember that night. It was the sound of the speaker turning on, just a crackle at first, then static. That boarding school was built in the 60s. Most of the tech hadn't worked in years. The PA system? Everyone said it was disconnected. But that night, something switched it on. We were in lockdown because of something going on off campus. They never said what exactly, just that we had to stay in our rooms, doors locked, lights off. The dorm monitors were on edge. You could feel it in the air. Something wasn't routine about this. And then, right in the middle of the silence, that speaker came on. A woman's voice. Clear. Calm. Like reading from a list. But here's the thing. None of the teachers had access to that system anymore. The PA hadn't worked in years. The power to that panel was shut off. I know because my cousin tried to prank the entire dorm with it last spring and got caught messing with a dead fuse box. Evan Reed, Jordan Lee, Heather Warren, Sasha Gray. We listened as names kept being called. Students. All from our school. Most of them kids we knew. Some were in our grades, some weren't. But the weirdest part was the order. It wasn't alphabetical. And it wasn't by room number either. It was almost like the voice was calling them by some other list. One only it could see. By the third name, everyone had gone still. By the fifth, we'd all realized something. Nobody had turned the system asterisk on. There was something familiar about the voice. Not the way a voice might sound like someone else, or how memory messes with you in the dark. No, this was exact. That's when Becca turned to me. Her face had gone pale. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at the wall speaker like she was trying to make it stop with her mind. Then she whispered, "That's Kara. Kara. She was a senior when I was a sophomore. She died 2 years ago. Found at the bottom of the old stairwell in C Wing. It was ruled an accident. But there were rumors about what she'd said the night before. Something about voices in the walls. And that she'd locked herself in the girls' bathroom, crying, saying she had to stop it before it reached the list. Aiden Gray. Elena Carter. Jordan Miles. Doris. Doris. I froze. That voice, her voice, just said my name. Twice. No last name. No room number. Just my name. Becca grabbed my arm. She felt it too. This wasn't some malfunction. This wasn't the teachers testing an old system. Whatever that was, it knew who we were. Mr. Delaney came around after curfew to calm us down. Said it was a power surge. Said old equipment does weird things sometimes. Except the PA had never, ever done that before. And when someone asked why the voice matched a dead girl's, he said we were just spooked from the lockdown. We weren't just spooked. We were being counted. That night, we stayed huddled together. No one wanted to sleep. We kept counting, making sure everyone in our dorm was still there. At 3:07 a.m., the PA crackled again. No names this time. Just one word, whispered over and over. Gone. 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 By morning, 3 students were missing. No broken doors. No windows open. No footprints. Just gone. The staff kept us indoors. No phones allowed. Parents were told it was a precautionary extension of lockdown due to safety concerns. But I wasn't waiting around for another name to be called. I told Becca I had to do something. That night, while the others pretended to sleep, I snuck out. The admin wing was locked. but I'd seen Mr. Delaney enter the code before. My hands were shaking. I typed it in anyway. The office smelled like dust and something metallic. Old tech blinked on shelves, tapes, switches, cables. I found the PA control panel. The light on it was off. I followed the wire under the desk and froze. It wasn't plugged in. There was no power. Nothing was connected. The entire system had been dead since last year's renovations. But we'd all heard it. Every student. Every teacher. Her voice. That's when I noticed something taped under the control desk. A paper, aged, edges brittle. A list of names. 5 were crossed out. The top 5 students who were now missing. And the next one? Mine. The next morning, they pulled me from class. No explanation. Just a cold stare from the vice principal and a quiet escort to the front office. They said I'd broken into a restricted area, tampered with school equipment, and endangered others. When I tried to explain, they just stared. They called my parents. By the end of the day, I was expelled. They wiped the report from the school site. Said it was internal. No police. No investigation. And no one ever talked about the missing students again. It was like they'd never existed. I didn't speak about it for years. Who would believe me? But something never let go. A weight I couldn't name. It happened last winter. I was back home, helping clear out my mom's attic after she moved. I found it wedged behind an old lamp, our school's yearbook from the year Kara died. She was in the back pages. The last photo section. Candid shots from dorm life. And there it was, scribbled in blue ink across the bottom corner. I never told anyone. But sometimes when it's quiet at night, I hear the PA crackle. And I wait, just in case she says my name again. Story 4. I started teaching at Brickstone High in November. It's the kind of school where drills are routine. Fire drills. Lockdowns. Evacuations. The intercom crackles at least once a week. They told me the area had seen incidents in the past. That the extra precautions were just policy. But by my 3rd week, something didn't sit right. The students were too calm. No nervous glances. No whispered jokes. Just silence. Perfect posture. Waiting. Like they were trained, but not by us. Attention, initiate lockdown protocol. This is a drill. The door locked. Shades pulled. Lights out. But what shook me was this. The moment it began, every student stood and moved at once, without being told. They slid into place like it was muscle memory. Too perfect. Too rehearsed. I whispered, "Is this really necessary?" One girl, barely a whisper, said, "It's always necessary." I asked what she meant, but she didn't answer. None of them would. Then I heard it. Heavy footfalls. Echoing down the hall. Not fast. Just steady. And that's when I realized I was the only one afraid. The first time I heard it, I thought it was a mouse. Just scratching. A soft, irregular scrape behind the wall near the whiteboard. But then I realized it was coming from inside the wall. And it was slow. Rhythmic. Like fingernails. I froze. It lasted maybe a minute, then stopped. I looked around the room. None of the students reacted. Not a blink. Not a word. "Did you hear that?" I asked the girl closest to me. The girl turned her head slightly, just enough to whisper back. "This isn't a drill, it never was." Her eyes weren't scared. They were resigned. Like she knew what was coming. I tried asking the principal the next day. I asked who planned the drills. Who authorized them. He said he didn't know what I was talking about. I asked if he'd checked the wall behind my whiteboard. He laughed. Then changed the subject. And that was the moment I knew. I wasn't imagining anything. I just wasn't supposed to ask. It happened on a Friday. I'd stayed late grading essays. The sun already dipped below the skyline. The building was too quiet. No janitors, no teachers, no students left. Just me. The PA crackled. That familiar robotic voice echoed. Lockdown initiated. But no explanation. No drill notice. No email. Just lockdown. And then I heard it, movement. Not footsteps, not panic. It was careful. Placed. I crept down the hall. I saw students. But they weren't hiding. They were posing. Perfectly still. Kneeling, facing lockers. Some with hands over ears. One boy was even smiling, but his eyes were terrified. I tried opening the nearest classroom. Locked. Tried another. Locked. Every room locked. Only one door opened. The old science lab. I'd never even seen it used. I didn't remember a key for it. But it opened for me. And inside the room was freezing. Beakers were filled with dark, unmoving liquid. The windows were sealed. And on the far end, an overhead projector already on. It displayed a single image on the whiteboard, something that looked like an old school lockdown procedure. But there was one extra step. I didn't understand, until I heard the breathing behind me. Not mine, not human. I turned in my resignation the next morning. No questions asked. The principal didn't even blink. No exit interview. No curiosity. It was like they'd been waiting. I packed my things and left the same day. I didn't speak to the students again. Didn't check my email. Didn't look back. But before I left, I wrote one last thing. Final entry, March 22nd. They told us the drills were to keep students safe. But they've lied. The school isn't keeping the students safe. It's keeping something in. And I think it's getting tired of waiting. In places built to keep us safe, fear finds its way in. A substitute who never blinked and never left. A letter in a locker that knew too much. A voice from the PA that belonged to the dead. And a school not protecting students, but hiding something else. Lockdowns are meant to protect. But what if there's something else entirely? You survived this time. Have you ever experienced a real school lockdown? Comment your story below. We want to hear it. And remember, some drills aren't drills at all.